All right. Hey, Bob, how are you?
Hi, Douglas. Great. And yourself?
Oh, doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the
Excellent.
show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, you were a business guy for many years, over 30 years, according to your bio.
Yes.
What were you doing in high tech? Were you a sales or were you on the
It
technology
was,
side or what?
yeah, it was typically on the business side. So I did acquisitions, was my last job. So the integration of acquisitions for large companies like Cisco. And then prior to that, I worked at some small software companies, and I also did consulting work, managed consulting groups in the technology industry for large companies that were trying to integrate new technologies.
Okay, so for the past 30 years, though, you must have seen a tremendous change because 30 years ago, we were kind of just at the infancy of the internet, right? And then it just exploded.
It did. Yes, it did. Although, there are a lot of ups and downs. If you remember, 2000, everyone thought the whole internet was going to take over the world, and then it crashed down, and then 20 years later, it's pretty much taken over the world, uh, and it goes in those fits and spurts.
Well, it's interesting. I was having this conversation with somebody else a couple of days ago, and we were talking about, I don't know, the peaks and troughs, if you will, of
Hmm.
technology. So you go back to like 1990, early 90s, when people were just getting computers, just figuring out this thing called the internet. And then it just was rocketing until about 2000, like you said. And then we
Hmm.
had the big dot-com crash bubble.
Hmm.
And then social media came along. And then it took off all over again. I really believe that Facebook and Twitter were the catalysts to rocket internet back to where it was, pre dot com, because it was something totally new and it gave sort of the power to the people to get on. Now it's almost gone too far the other way because you've got all this cancel culture, and I think there's a little too much power in the hands of Facebook and Twitter, but that's another topic. But you know what I mean? It's just that was
Yeah.
the new
No,
propellant for the rocket, I
yeah,
think.
you're absolutely right. It supported more peer-to-peer, so people could speak directly to other people. And then I think what that unfortunately created were those echo chambers. It
Yeah,
used to be with media, everything was filtered. When I was a kid, there were like five broadcast
well, exactly.
televisions.
Yeah.
And you had to, actually, it was part of the law that you had to present the other side or give them equal time. Obviously, that doesn't exist in social media. But social media is one thing. Amazon is another, and it's changing the whole retail landscape. Obviously, social media killed a lot of the traditional media companies, and it does revolutionize the way we operate in the world. Be interesting to see the next big phase. In fact, my second book will actually, or third book will actually get into this too.
Oh, great.
It
Okay.
gets more into 20 years in the future with AI, and you'll see more and more changes happening, I think, coming in.
Well, okay. Let's get to that in a second.
Hmm.
I think that you had mentioned about traditional media, and you and I might be around the same age. I don't know. Looking at you, I think we're in the same age group. I'm
Yeah.
going to be 59 this year. So
Well, I got a couple of years
you
on
got a
you.
couple of years. Okay. Well, then you'll know that when I reference people like Walter Cronkite, you'll know who I'm
Uh-huh.
talking about. So back in those days, I mean, news was unbiased, at least the way it was presented.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know that they had a certain agenda, but they kept it a little more quiet than say CNN or MSNBC do. Okay,
Yeah.
and that was it. That was your choice. Like you said, you watched that, and then you could kind of formulate your own opinions
Hmm.
about whatever topic they were talking about. Social media, like you said, created all of these echo chambers for people, and it forced the major networks to adapt to that, to take
Hmm.
sides, basically. Because if they were still producing Walter Cronkite style news, I don't think you would, I think they would lose a tremendous amount of audience. I think they had to take sides. What do you think?
No, I agree with that. And it was really, from my perspective, it got worse with when Trump was president, because then the different news outlets would take a firmer and firmer side. So I used to think like New York Times was always a little bit on the liberal side. But when Trump came out, they really went after him. And then the same thing with Fox News. They went the other direction.
Yeah.
And I think that was a polarizing individual. And as a result, to your point, people became polarized and the media followed them. I don't believe the media actually initiated it. I think they reacted to the market.
Okay. Well, I think that's fair. Also, I think Trump was the only one who pushed back against it because he saw it. And I don't see Biden doing a lot of that.
No.
He's not calling out the fake news and, just shoving it right back in their face. I don't think he's in that camp at all. So on that, as a intro.
As a
segue.
We haven't even mentioned my book yet.
So the book you were talking about, that you haven't written that book yet?
I have. I touch on it in the second book, and it is pretty much my third book, and I'm just finishing the first draft of the third book.
Okay, well, so which book are we promoting here?
The first book, which is Her Dark Matter Necklace.
Okay.
Which just got released 2 days ago. It's just on Amazon now.
Okay, perfect. So why don't you tell us about that book a little bit? Give us a synopsis.
Sure. So it's about a teenage girl and an insecure gal. She has a dream. She meets a universal spirit in that dream, and he commands her to bring love and beauty into the world or else. So it's the hero's journey. But what's really unusual about the book is it addresses a number of what I call big issue or big questions in the world. So, for example, if there is a God, how was he created? Would be one question. Related to that is, if there is a God, what would be his purpose for all of life? So I can get into a little bit more detail on that, or if you just want the elevator pitch.
Well, we only have a 15-minute show, so we probably don't want to get too far into it. And we just want to wet people's whistles so they can, if they want more, they got to go buy the book and find out what happens.
Yeah. Well, then let me just add a couple quick things. One is the universal laws of nature as an example, because I did physics as a student and things, and I was always amazed that everything came together perfectly to support life. So, for example, gravity, the force of gravity, which everyone knows is that attractive force between two objects. Turns out that if gravity was just a little bit stronger, then when the universe was created at a Big Bang, it would have gone boom, boom, would have imploded. If the force was a little bit weaker, then at Big Bang, the universe would have gone out, but nothing would have come together. Like there would be no stars, no galaxies. So the difference was less than 1%. And then so the question is, why was it the perfect number to allow life to be created? And so the book kind of talks a little bit about that. And another topic, which I'll ask you, Douglas, humans are very rational creatures. So are you guided by your emotions or your intellect, would you say?
Well, okay, first of all, your first statement, humans are rational creatures, that's subjective, I think. We're theoretically supposed to be the rational creatures on this planet.
Yeah.
But after having dogs in my life for most of my life, they've got us beat on certain levels. They really do. But getting back to what you're asking, am I personally guided by emotion or intellect? I tend to be more on the intellect side. I sort of keep my emotions private for people in my life that I love and care about. I try not
Right.
to get too emotional in my work because that never
So,
solves anything.
a related question to that would be,
Okay.
do you view your emotions as a strength or a weakness?
Uh, More of a weakness.
So, yeah, so it's funny because that is really, there's a lot in that on in the book. And in fact, Alice's tries to hide, who's the protagonist, hides from her emotions, is not comfortable with them. And the whole journey is her being comfortable, becoming comfortable with them. And then at that point, she's able to do what she needs to do. But yeah, it's funny. So it's a lot of ideas like this, and
Okay.
my wife actually calls it the Book of Bob's Big Ideas, or Bobby for short.
Well, some of the emotions, it depends though, because the emotions can be divided up into two camps. You know, the warm, fuzzy love emotions are wonderful, okay? But
Hmm.
then there's those fear, insecurity emotions, anger.
Yep.
Those are definitely poison and definitely harmful to my progress as a human being. So
Although they protected us, I mean, they are evolutionary to a certain
they are a
extent, and
protection
so
mechanism, yeah.
there was a reason for
Right.
those emotions to develop. But it's fascinating, and what I've found is when I ask that question to people, if they say they're guided by their intellect, then they typically view emotions as a weakness. Whereas if they're typically guided by their emotions, they view that as a strength. So it's pretty interesting. And then I think also, if I ask them, the big decisions that you make in your life, are those emotional or rational? And almost everyone says that the emotion really drives those big decisions. So anyway, it's interesting, and
Well,
they're just.
it's a great
Mhm.
question, but for the person who answers that they are guided by their emotions and they consider that their strength, then they consider their intellect their weakness?
Uh, no,
Because
what I meant was
that
their
would be scary.
emotions are a strength for everybody. So not only for them, but for everyone. So a number of people feel that emotions are a weakness and they need to hide them. Uh, so they're not saying specifically their emotions. They're saying emotions in general are a strength for humans.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
I think overall, I would tend to disagree with that because I sort of
Hmm.
like the idea of people behaving themselves especially when they're out in public. You know, at home you can
Right.
do what you want, but there's that kind of nice, comfortable feeling of going to a crowded place and people stand in line the way they're supposed to and be nice to each other. And that takes some emotional discipline
Hmm.
that I don't see as much of it as like when I was a kid.
Although I would say compassion is a pretty important emotion, and being unfair and selfish is, it's more emotional rather than intellect. But anyway, it's
It's true. I
you
mean,
got to read the book then,
yeah,
Douglas.
well, we could dissect this question for a long time. Absolutely
How are you
true.
going to fit this in 15
Well,
minutes?
you know what? We're already up. Our time is just going by. Okay, so your book is called Her Dark Matter Necklace, and what genre do you fit that in?
That's a great question because initially I thought it was science fiction because it has a lot of science speculation in it. The problem is that it also involves universal spirit or God, effectively.
Okay.
And then on the other side, it talks about ethics of the modern world, like inequality. So it has these three
Oh, I see.
almost diametrically opposed angles. And it was only recently that I found a new genre that actually had a fit, and it's called visionary fiction. And it combines typically science fiction, spirituality, and ethics, and it involves typically a transformation of a person or a world. So I found that genre, and I also then found my publisher there too. So
Oh, okay.
that actually worked out well.
That was my next question, but you just answered it. I was going to ask you if you were self-published or traditionally published. So,
Well, I actually started the whole self-publishing route, and I this book actually is being re-released because initially the initial release was going through Amazon self-publishing, and that process worked really well, I thought. The problem is there was no marketing, and then I did not know how to market, and that's where having a publisher was very, very helpful. So I did do the traditional process, which was sending out 100 inquiry letters and getting rejected across the board.
right.
So it wasn't until I found the right genre fit that I was able to actually then get the publisher.
Yeah, they're more fussy about that. They need to put you on a shelf. There isn't a miscellaneous shelf that works too well for authors. They got to find a cubby hole for you, you know?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's the readers too. So,
Right,
yep.
exactly. Well, Bob, we do have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, our time just blew right by. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes, it's bobalbo.com. And then on Facebook, it's Her Dark Matter Necklace.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. This was a lot of fun.
I appreciate it, Douglas. And maybe after you read the book, we can have a follow-up discussion.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah.